There are cities where every square meter is worth a fortune. Cities where millions of people compete for a place to live. Every road is crowded. Every apartment is occupied. Every street is alive. Then, there is a city that breaks every one of those rules. A city built with billions of dollars. A city with some of the widest roads on Earth. A city designed to become the heart of an entire nation. Yet somehow, it feels almost empty. When I first discovered satellite images of this place, I honestly thought they had been digitally altered. The roads looked impossibly wide. Entire neighborhoods appeared perfectly planned. Government buildings stretched across vast landscapes. Everything looked too perfect, almost artificial. But one question refused to leave my mind. If someone spent billions creating a city like this, where were the people? That single question brought me to Myanmar, a country filled with ancient temples, dense forests, and centuries of history. But I wasn't searching for its past. I was searching for a city that seemed to have skipped its future. Its name was Naypyidaw. The moment I stepped outside the airport, something felt unusual. The terminal was clean, modern, surprisingly quiet. Not the kind of silence you expect late at night, but the kind that makes you wonder if you've arrived on the wrong day. Outside, I met the taxi driver who would take me into the city. As we pulled onto the main highway, I looked out the window and instinctively checked my phone's map. Surely this couldn't be the main road. It was enormous. Lane after lane stretched toward the horizon until I lost count. I've driven through New York, Dubai, and Tokyo. I've seen highways built for millions of people. But I'd never seen anything quite like this. The strange part wasn't its size. It was what wasn't there. No traffic jam. No stream of commuters. No buses packed with passengers. For nearly a minute, our car moved across this colossal highway without another vehicle beside us. It felt less like entering a capital city, and more like driving through a film set waiting for actors to arrive. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I leaned toward the driver and asked, "Is it always this empty?" He smiled, not with surprise, but with the expression of someone who had answered that question many times before. "Most days," he said. Then, after a brief pause, he added something I couldn't stop thinking about. This city was built for millions, but most of them never came. For the rest of the journey, I couldn't take my eyes off the road. Perfect street lights, fresh road markings, beautiful parks, rows of government buildings rising in the distance. Everything suggested this should be one of Asia's busiest capitals. Instead, it felt like I had arrived years before the city itself. At that moment, I thought I was investigating an empty city. But I was wrong. Because Naypyidaw isn't abandoned. It isn't unfinished. And it isn't a ghost city. It's something far more mysterious. A capital that was built almost overnight, in the hope that an entire nation would follow. The deeper I explored, the more I realized this wasn't just the story of a city. It was the story of one of the boldest and most controversial experiments in modern urban history. And to understand why it exists, I first had to understand why Myanmar abandoned the capital it already had. The next morning, I left my hotel before sunrise. From my window, I had seen the outline of enormous government buildings in the distance, and now I wanted to see them up close. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated the city, the true scale of Naypyidaw became impossible to ignore. The roads grew even wider, the intersections became larger, and roundabouts decorated with fountains, sculptures, and perfectly trimmed gardens appeared at every turn. Everything looked meticulously planned. Yet I still passed only a handful of vehicles. Eventually, my driver slowed beside an enormous government complex. Towering buildings stood behind security gates, and beyond them, more structures stretched toward the horizon. "This is where the ministries are," he told me. I stepped out of the car. A warm breeze moved through rows of national flags. Apart from a few government employees arriving for work, the entire area was almost silent. Standing there, I asked myself the same question again. Who builds an entire capital like this? The answer takes us back to the year 2005. At the time, Myanmar's capital wasn't Naypyidaw. It was Yangon, a city overflowing with history, culture, businesses, and millions of residents. For generations, Yangon had been the country's political and economic heart. If you wanted to govern Myanmar, you governed from Yangon. Then, without a public vote, without years of debate, and with very little warning, everything changed. On November 6, 2005, thousands of government employees received unexpected orders. Pack your belongings. Leave your offices. Report to a new destination immediately. Convoys of trucks carrying documents, computers, office furniture, and entire government departments began driving nearly 320 kilometers north. Their destination wasn't another established city. It was a massive construction site carved out of forests and farmland. Imagine arriving at work, only to discover that your office, and your entire capital, had moved. Within months, ministries, military headquarters, and government agencies began operating from this brand new location. The city was named Naypyidaw, which translates to Abode of Kings. Officially, the government explained that the new location sat closer to the geographical center of the country, making administration easier. There was more land, more room to expand, and better transportation links for the future. Those reasons sounded practical. But as I stood surrounded by enormous empty spaces, they didn't feel like the whole story. Many historians and political analysts believe there were other important considerations. Yangon was a crowded coastal city where massive public demonstrations had taken place in the past. Its narrow streets made government buildings easier to reach during periods of unrest. Naypyidaw was different. It was built far inland. Government districts were separated by vast distances. Wide roads created clear access routes. Sensitive buildings were surrounded by large security zones. From a strategic perspective, it was easier to protect. Then there was one final piece of the puzzle. A story repeated so often that it almost became part of the city's identity. Some reports claimed that senior military leaders consulted astrologers before selecting the exact date and even the precise hour of the move. It's an extraordinary story, and one that captured headlines around the world. But despite its popularity, there is no conclusive public evidence proving astrology alone determined the decision. Whether it was strategy, personal belief, or a combination of many factors, only those who made the decision know the complete truth. As I looked across the vast government district, I realized something. Moving a capital is one thing. Convincing an entire nation to move with it is something else entirely. And that was the part of the story I was about to discover next. The more I explored Naypyidaw, the more I realized. This wasn't a city that wanted to impress you all at once. It revealed itself slowly. One strange detail at a time. I spent the entire afternoon driving through different parts of the city. Government buildings, residential neighborhoods, hotels, shopping areas. On a map, they looked surprisingly close together. But in reality, they felt worlds apart. The roads connecting them were enormous, perfectly paved, perfectly maintained, and strangely, almost empty. At one point, I stopped beside one of Naypyidaw's famous highways. From photographs, it looked exaggerated, but standing there in person, it was even harder to believe. The road stretched across the landscape like an airport runway. Lane after lane disappeared into the distance. I decided to wait. I wanted to see if the city would suddenly come alive. 30 seconds passed. Then a white pickup truck rolled by. Another 30 seconds, and a motorcycle appeared on the opposite side. After nearly 2 minutes, that was all I had seen. I wasn't standing in a remote village. I was standing in the capital of an entire country. The silence wasn't unsettling anymore. It was fascinating. Further ahead, I reached the Parliament complex. The buildings were enormous. Elegant architecture stood behind carefully guarded entrances. Wide lawns surrounded every structure. Everything projected permanence. Everything projected power. Yet because the buildings were separated by such vast distances, the entire district felt almost monumental rather than urban. It wasn't built for crowds gathering on foot. It was built on a scale that made people seem small. Later, I visited one of the city's largest hotels. Walking through the entrance, I expected to hear luggage rolling across marble floors, conversations echoing through the lobby, the sound of elevators opening and closing. Instead, I heard my own footsteps. The chandeliers sparkled overhead. The reception desk stood ready. Conference halls stretched beyond the lobby. But there were only a handful of guests. It felt less like a busy hotel, and more like one waiting for an event that hadn't begun yet. The same feeling followed me to Naypyidaw International Airport. The terminal was modern, spacious, bright, designed to handle millions of passengers. Yet much of that capacity remains unused. Inside, the loudest sound was the echo of people walking across the polished floor. Everywhere I looked, I saw the same pattern. Infrastructure built for a future that hadn't fully arrived. But then something happened that changed the way I saw this city. As evening approached, I left the government district and wandered into one of the residential neighborhoods. Children were playing football in a small open field. A family was eating dinner outside their home. Neighbors chatted while street vendors prepared fresh food. For the first time since arriving, the city felt alive. That's when I realized something important. The stories I'd heard before coming here weren't entirely true. Naypyidaw isn't empty. Today, hundreds of thousands of people live here. Civil servants, teachers, doctors, shopkeepers, families. Life exists, just not at the scale the city was built to accommodate. I sat down at a small tea stall and asked the owner a simple question. If the city is so modern, why do so many people still prefer Yangon? He smiled for a moment, then poured another cup of tea. You can build a house in a year, he said, but you can't build a hometown. Those words stayed with me long after I left, because suddenly, everything made sense. Roads can be planned. Airports can be built. Government offices can be relocated. But memories, friendships, traditions, and the feeling of belonging can't be ordered into existence. They grow slowly, across generations. And perhaps that was Naypyidaw's greatest challenge. It had all the infrastructure of a great capital, but it was still waiting for something no amount of money could guarantee. The question was no longer, why is this city so empty? The real question had become, was it ever meant to be full in the first place? And that answer would completely change the way I understood Naypyidaw. On my final morning in Naypyidaw, I returned to the same highway where my journey had started. The road was still enormous. The streetlights still stretched endlessly into the distance, and the traffic was still surprisingly light. But something had changed. When I first arrived, the emptiness felt strange, almost impossible. Now, I understood it. Naypyidaw was never designed to become another Yangon. It wasn't created to compete with the world's busiest capitals. It was created for a different purpose. A place where a government could operate. A place with room to expand. A place built around control, administration, and long-term planning. And in that sense, it succeeded. Government ministries function. The parliament operates. National events take place here. Thousands of people wake up every morning, go to work, run businesses, and build their lives inside this unusual capital. Calling it simply a ghost city misses the reality. But at the same time, the questions surrounding Naypyidaw are impossible to ignore. Because building a city is not the same as creating a community. A city is more than buildings connected by roads. It is the unexpected conversations on crowded streets. The small restaurants that become local favorites. The neighborhoods where children grow up. The places where people create memories without even realizing it. Those things cannot be designed by engineers. They cannot be completed with a construction budget. They cannot be delivered on a deadline. They have to grow. And perhaps, that is the reason Naypyidaw fascinates the world. Because it represents one of humanity's biggest dreams, and one of its biggest challenges. The dream that we can create the perfect city. A city without congestion. Without disorder. Without limitations. A city designed exactly how planners imagined. But the challenge is something much harder. Because humans don't only need efficient places. We need meaningful places. We need places that feel alive. Places that carry stories. Places that connect us to the people around us. As I drove toward the airport for the final time, I looked back at the endless avenues, massive government buildings, and perfectly maintained parks. There was something almost beautiful about it. Naypyidaw wasn't a failure. It wasn't a forgotten experiment. It was something much more complicated. A city caught between two worlds. A city that proved humans can build almost anything, but also reminded us that some things cannot be manufactured. Belonging, identity, a sense of home. Those must be created by people. Not planners. Not architects. Not governments. People. And maybe that is the greatest mystery hidden inside Naypyidaw. Not why someone spent billions building a city in the middle of nowhere, but whether a city can truly become a capital before it becomes a home. Because when I stood alone on that enormous highway, surrounded by perfect roads and silent buildings, I finally understood something. The most impressive cities on earth are not the ones with the biggest buildings, or the widest roads, or the largest budgets. They are the ones where millions of ordinary moments happen every single day. A city is not alive because of what is built. It is alive because of what happens inside it. And perhaps that is the lesson Naypyidaw leaves behind. You can build a city overnight, but you cannot build its soul. That takes time.